The Dirt with me, Mike Howell, an economics podcast where I present the down and dirty agronomic science to help grow crops and bottom lines. Inspired by eKonomics.com, farming's go-to informational resource, I'm here to break down the latest crop nutrition research, news, and issues, helping farmers make better business decisions through actionable insights. Let's dig in. Well, hello again, everyone. Welcome back to The Dirt. Glad you're tuning in with us this week. Today, we have a very special guest with us. We have Dr. Tommy Bowden with us. Dr. Bowden is a medical doctor. I think this is going to be the first time we've had a medical doctor on with us, and you're probably wondering, what in the world are we going to talk about with a medical doctor? Well, if you'll hang on for just a few minutes, I think you're really going to get some good information out of this. Before we get started, I want to give Dr. Bowden just a minute to introduce himself and tell us what he does.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. I was born here in South Louisiana and raised in the South here. From Lafayette, went to high school, college in Lafayette, graduated in chemical engineering in Lafayette out of ULL, went to med school in New Orleans and graduated in 92, did an internal medicine residency in Baton Rouge, and then started working in the ER. I've been working in the ER for the past 30 years.
Okay. Well, Dr. Bowden, we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to visit with us. I know you've got a lot going on. Before we really get kicked in and talk about what I wanted to talk about, I want to throw a curveball at you. I did not prepare you for this question, and you may get upset with me, but we'll deal with that. But there's a lot of information going around on the internet here in the South, especially. We're right at the end of crawfish season here, and there's different opinions out there. People say you have to remove that digestive tract from that crawfish before you eat it. Personally, I don't do that. I just pop the head off and start eating. But can you tell us medically, is there any reason why we need to pull that digestive tract out of there, or can we just eat those crawfish?
I don't know if I can speak from a professional standpoint medically because there's a reason, but I've run into people that have had exposure to crawfish, the spicy nature of it, things like that, and they can affect your bowels, right? And as we see, so people with diverticulitis have run into problems with things like that, where I catch them after a boil where they've eaten and then they've eaten the crawfish a second time or something. So that's something where I don't know if I can speak towards removing the little black vein, the digestive tract out of the back of the crawfish, if that makes a difference or not. But I do know people with diverticulitis tend to have a little trouble processing all the spices and all of the stuff that's in the crawfish boil, I think. I don't know.
Okay, well, I guess we still don't have a definitive answer on that, so I'll leave that to our listeners. They can decide for themselves which way is going to be the best. Dr. Bowden, what we really wanted to talk to everybody about today is some safety factors, some concerns that happen in rural areas. I grew up in rural Mississippi. I've lived in rural areas most of my life, and shortly after I graduated from high school, I joined the volunteer fire department. Got a good bit of medical training there and did that for probably 15 or 20 years after I got out of high school. But I saw a lot of different things. One of the first things I learned was about the ABCs of first aid. And I think that's something that a lot of people may not understand. And kind of talk to us a little bit about the ABCs of first aid, what somebody needs to know if an incident comes up.
Sure, that's a tough discussion, even though it sounds very simple about it. But it's a tough discussion. But I would tell you, talking about the ABCs, they're really covered in the basic life support training classes, and I think those are really critical for people that are in remote areas to know how to care for yourself and prevent what seems like an emergency and you prevent it from being a catastrophe. Just basic things. There are certain things we talk about ABC. They translate into airway, breathing, and circulation. We try to prioritize in that fashion. They've shuffled them through the years a little bit, but I just stay with the ABC concepts. It's out and about. I would tell you, if somebody passes out in front of you or becomes unconscious or something where they're having airway trouble, you want to make sure that their airway is open in some fashion. That could be varied presentations where somebody's choking on something, or maybe they have a seizure and go down in front of you. Just as simple as putting them on a rescue position on their side to try to keep their airway open, I think is important for us. If their airway's open and you can see that they're not breathing, that's where humanity hopefully steps in and you try to breathe for them for a little bit, mouth to mouth. Sometimes there are all kind of devices that are available now that serve as barriers. if it's a loved one, I'm probably not using a barrier, right? If my loved one goes down, I'm getting after it. But there are certain populations you may get into where you're not sure about, and it can be very risky. And so that mouth to mouth situation is tough. So keeping some kind of barrier device, as you said, I'm working on a farm with a lot of people that come and go, and they're not part of my family, but they're part of the workforce for me. I'd go, well, just having that out there would be helpful. The other thing, talk about the A to B to C is the circulation component of it. And somebody passes out and you see they're breathing and you check their pulse and they seem to not have a pulse. That's where that BLS training can come in for us to just do basic stuff to serve as, compressions while our heart's not beating or beating poorly in that moment. It's one of the few elements that I think that just keeping that blood moving as minimally as it moves, just keeping it moving is critical for us. Because if it's not moving, there's nothing happening. So anyway, just kind of a quick glance over again. I don't want to discount that ABC, but I really think to go in depth, you would really need to take a BLS training course, which is fairly simple and inexpensive, and really, really helpful for those crises times to help you think through it.
Right. Dr. Bowden, since you mentioned taking that class, can you give our listeners any information where they could find these type of classes? I think the Red Cross used to do some of those and various other organizations.
Yeah, I work at Riverside Medical Center. If I was throwing a plug out there for them, that they are pretty consistent in trying to create classes like that. Some are for the community, some are for the healthcare workers that are in the area. But BLS is something that both can share together. It's not something that you have to take with community members or with healthcare workers. I think you do better to take it with in a mixed format where you have both available to get the education and expertise of those people that have done it.
Right. Okay. Well, Dr. Bowden, let's move on a little bit. The next thing I kind of wanted to mention, I talked about being a firefighter, and I never will forget the very first call that I went on as a firefighter. I had no idea what to expect, but the pager went off, and I jump in the truck and take off. Well, it ended up being a farm accident. This man was attempting to hook up a tractor with a 3-point hitch. He hooked the implement up, and somehow during the process of doing that, he tried to raise the implement up and it was too heavy for the tractor. It actually raised the front end of the tractor up, pinned him beneath the tractor, between the tractor and the implement, and he had a compound fracture of his leg. So that was pretty remarkable for my first experience on the fire department. And I really had no idea what to do. Thankfully, we had some trained people there that knew what to do and how to take care of him before the ambulance got there. But broken bones can happen to anybody. What should somebody do in the event of a broken bone, and even when you have a compound fracture where that bone's protruding out? What does somebody need to take care of in that situation?
Yeah, so kind of a couple different scenarios you laid out with one sentence, but I would tell you if it's a fracture or severely injured limb, you may not know if it's fractured, right? But if it's a severely injured limb, you kind of want to immobilize it in the position it's in as best you can, and some of that may translate into a position of comfort where you have to move it just a little bit to get a little more comfort out of the patient. If you kind of set a breathful there with a leg injury and then you move that to an open fracture where you've got a bone protruding out. You want to keep things clean as best you can. Mind you, I didn't realize you're in a field with a farm implement that causes this. So do your best to keep it clean. You're not trying to reduce fractures in the field, in my mind. You're not trying to put that bone back inside the skin per se. At some point, that'll have to be taken to surgery and all washed out and cleaned out in a sterile fashion. But the best thing I think, having done this for a while, is that just immobilize it as best you can in that position. If the patient is actually transportable, try to get them to an area where you can get them where it may be easier for EMS to get to instead of in the middle of a pasture or something. So but if you said, "No, it's rough when I'm moving them," or there's a lot of blood or something, I go, that's when it takes you to other ways of thinking and going, "I'm just gonna immobilize it. I'm gonna lay them flat, maybe just their head is slightly elevated or something." At that point, I'm really trying to keep a bad situation from turning into a catastrophe, meaning death. And so it looks like the implement fell on them and crushed their limb and swollen, it's purple, it's discolored, they can't move it. I'm assuming they broke it. I'm assuming they're losing blood in their limb. You're not trying to put any tourniquets on at that point in time if it's a closed fracture. You're really just trying to immobilize it in the position it's in, wait on EMS. If you can possibly get them to the road or closer to where EMS can get you, because I've seen EMS get in and get stuck, and then you got a problem or a problem on a problem. So What I would tell you is, if possible, if you said, I can't move this guy, man, every time I move him, he's blood curdling, screaming, I'd go, well, you just got to leave him where he is, immobilize it. If you said, well, I can tell there's an oak bone sticking through and he's squirting blood out through this hole, basic life support training kind of dictates that you really want to try and put some sterile packing in that wound and pack it to the depth of the wound, put pressure on it. See if you can control it like that. And if that doesn't work, then you're not trying to remove that packing. You want to pack on top of that packing and keep packing in. I hear a lot of tales where people were packing in the field, couldn't get it to stop, remove that and started repacking. And you're pulling clot out and other things out and factors that are critical for us developing that clot in there. So you really want to try and pack on the packing, just continue packing. You said, I've done all I can. I've used my packing, just soaking the packing. I would say, tourniquet in the field is one of the most life-saving measures out there that most policemen and law enforcement officers and paramedics and first line providers have those tourniquets on there because it can really save your life from what seems like a wound that you should not die from, but you can't stop the bleeding. If you can't get it controlled and it's still bleeding, and put a tourniquet on, and when you put that tourniquet on, you want to time it. You want to note that time on that tourniquet, which is it's tough because you at some point in time you got to reassess it and reevaluate it, and hopefully it's in a healthcare setting. But I think probably those maneuvers would be probably the most helpful you could do while you're in the field and trying to address that injury and keep it from turning bad.
Dr. Bowden, you mentioned taking the person somewhere closer to an ambulance or making it easier for them to get to, and that was one thing that we always tried to talk to people when we had people coming in. Give them good directions. Don't just say go down to where the tree blew down 20 years ago. People may not remember that, or may not remember where a gate is that's commonplace that we talk about. But if you can give them specific directions, nowadays with our iPhones, you can send a pin to the emergency people, and they can help get there with that pin. But the better directions you can give, the better. And if you do happen to have enough people there, send somebody to go drive the ambulance in, lead the ambulance in. That always helps to get them to the person and not spend time trying to find where they need to go.
Yeah, very critical, very good point you're bringing up there, and that I've been doing this long enough to know that that was not the case maybe 30 years ago or 25 years ago. But nowadays, I get to listen. I'm part of the radio network in the ER. We listen to them talking and chattering. I can hear the event happen, and the helicopter lights right where the event happened, and picks them up and brings them to the closest trauma center. So it's really kind of injury side triage, where when they get there, basically they realize that this is going on and this is where this person should go. So they literally light right there as close as they can get to them, get them on the helicopter and fly them to where they need to be. Which is, it doesn't get talked about enough, but I'm kind of pre that, and so where that didn't occur, and now to listen to it behind the scenes occur is really really neat to kind of go, because they roll them into me at Riverside. We have a great facility, a great little hospital. We take care of everything that comes through the door as best we can, but I don't have a trauma surgeon, don't have a neurosurgeon, don't have any ologists around, maybe a couple, but cardiologist, but just not a lot of people around. If they roll something in where it's a full trauma code, I'm wanting to do the things I can to stabilize them and get them down the road to a higher level. So people do walk in the door like that, where they kind of go, I had this implement go through my left chest or something, and here I am. I walked in the door with it, and so you take care of those things and then get them to that higher level. But the what they call it, I imagine the LEARN network, the Louisiana Emergency Response Network, has really become powerful in oversight and direction for that. Injury side triage and redirection real time, which is special.
Yeah, things have sure come a long way. That's for sure. Dr. Bowden, we're both here in the South. Things are already starting to heat up. I think we've had 90-degree temperatures, 95-degree temperatures for the last few weeks now. It gets to that time of the year where we start seeing people having heat related illnesses. And being out on a farm, we can run into that pretty routinely. But it makes me remember back to a time when I was in graduate school. I had a crew of people working for me, and we were putting out insecticide trials. We were mixing different insecticides and spraying those. We had on Tyvek suits and full face respirators, and it's 100 degrees and 90% relative humidity. We had been doing this for 5 or 6 hours, and it got pretty hot. In the process of doing all of this, I had one of the students that was helping me that kind of, he said, "Hey, I'm not feeling good," and I could tell he was really pale. He started having some muscle spasms, and he just collapsed on us. I did not realize at the time. I didn't know, and your brain starts running. Is he having a reaction to some of these insecticides we're putting out, or is this a heat stroke? What's going on? Fortunately, we were able to get him in the truck and get him cooled off, get him to the hospital within about 10 minutes, and everything worked out. He was having a heat related issue, but can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit what to look for when it comes to heat related issues, and maybe how to distinguish that from an insecticide poisoning or something like that?
Yeah, Mike, I hadn't been down that rabbit hole in a while. You know, I see it periodically, not frequently. So with your prompting of that question to me, I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole to refresh some of my memory about the stuff and found some interesting bits and pieces. One of the things that kind of struck me is like, oh wow, but they talked about, I want to say, organophosphate poisonings. We talked about those in the right around 2000 or 1997. They threw out some numbers that they had 20,000 cases reported. Fast forward to 2020, there's 2,000 cases reported. And so, decimated that, did a great job of that, right? And they think that was really just education and getting education out, knowing that these can be a problem. You got to protect yourself. So when I went down that rabbit hole, I started pulling out all kind of long names, you're familiar with in your world readily, I'm sure. But when I started going down each of those little pathways and kind of this can cause this can cause that, this can cause this. What I found in general is there's a huge overlap of symptomatology between poisonings, insecticides or herbicides, as well as just heat exhaustion and heat stroke. They overlap the whole spectrum. So in my mind, one of the first things I thought about, just trying to offer a pearl to your listeners, would be don't try to diagnose it in the field. You know what I mean? Just treat what you're seeing. If they passed out, you want to keep them flat. Maybe try to get a little water in them. If they can't, if they when they wake up, you can't pour water on them if they're not conscious, right? But if they're awake, they have histories that you know about. Maybe diabetics got out there, worked too hard, worked too long, and insulin kicked in or something, and they got low blood sugar. So trying to understand and gain information quickly in that setting, but also realizing you're not necessarily responsible for treating it because a lot of the treatment tends to be supportive. And so just getting them to the ER quickly, like you said, just a few minutes trying to get them there quickly. You don't want to try and stand them up. You don't want to try and make them sit up after they passed out. You know, uh, Rudimentary or what I consider rudimentary, but helpful things you can do if somebody passes out, protect them, make sure their airway's open. But a lot of times when we pass out, the blood goes to our legs. And so when we lay somebody flat, I'll raise their legs up, as simple as that maneuver may be, as long as their airway's open and just trying to support and get some blood back to their core to pump to their brain and things like that, making sure that they're breathing and you've called that 911 and just trying to interact with them at that point, you know? So.
Dr. Bowden, back when I was doing this on a regular basis, they told us to cool the person off if you thought it was a heat related issue. And I'm hearing some things from people these days that may have changed a little bit. They say instead of slowly cooling them off, to rapidly cool them off, maybe even submerge them in ice water if you know they're having a heat stroke. What can you tell us about that? What's the best thing these days?
Just that maintaining that thought of I want to cool that person off. Because if you told me I don't readily have a tub of ice laying around, I would take me 30 minutes to get a tub of ice ready for somebody. So I think the most important thing is just knowing you're trying to cool them off. So cool towels, cool water, tap water is a first start instead of leaving them for 20 minutes to go get a tub of ice ready or something. I would also tell you that extreme changes in things are not helpful to us. So to go from, maybe a core temperature of 100 degrees, 102 degrees, when you're having that heat stroke, to throwing you in the water is in an ice bath it was shocking to the body, right? And so I'm not necessarily promoting that per se, but I think you got to cool them down. You have to think like that. Basic stuff is out of the sun, cool water on their body, things like that, and thinking about that next step in front of you. How do we get to the ER? Do we have to call somebody, or is it quicker for me to put them in the car and drive that 2 minutes, or should I call EMS? And so thinking like that, just basic things I think are really helpful, not trying to have it dictated that, well, I got to get them in that thing. If you said, I'm next to working where the horses are, and there's a horse trough full of cool water, I'd go, well, that makes sense to me. as long as you keep their head above water. But in the same breath, make sure you're with them and you don't abandon them, trying to do something else to fix them or something. First thought should be, I'm calling for help.
Right. Right.
Get some help.
Well, Dr. Bowden, I've thrown out several situations at you, things I have seen over the years. I'm sure you've seen a lot more than I have. Are there some other potential situations that you think people need to look out for in these rural situations, specifically on the farm?
Yeah, right. Stuff that we didn't talk about. I mean, we could talk for a couple of hours, right? But if you said, give me some stuff you see that they're on the farm, I'd go, classic is we're going out behind that shed, Mike, to help get some of those boards to help you finish building that barn you got there. We flip some boards up, and a snake hits me, right?
Yes,
And
sir.
so that snake hits me. I'm not trying to run per se. I'm not going to keep drinking that beer I've been drinking all day because that's going to mess things up. I'm not going to drink a bunch of caffeine. I'm trying to keep my heart rate low. I'm trying to keep my extremity down, whichever limb got hit. I'm not trying to catch the snake to bring it in so they can identify it. I watch people get hit and then get a second bite off of trying to then identify the snake, which is
Right.
insane. So, um, yeah, I grew up with an old school man who was, he did some things that I won't mention on how to take care of snake bites because I don't want it to be conveyed that would be okay. But I grew up an old school guy that didn't go to the ER for those kind of things. And he did the stuff that when I read in the literature, it says, don't do that. So don't cut the wound. Don't suck the wound. Don't put a tourniquet on it. You kind of want to do things that are going to minimize your heart rate, keeping it low. You want to go get checked out quickly. What we find is that about maybe 20% of the snakes out here are venomous and can do us harm. When I was a young man, there was some anti-venom medicines that were, I don't know, I grew up with it. They were kind of iffy that they was like, man, it's a risk if you get the anti-venom. So let's just see how the snake bite does. But 30 years of doing this and then refining things, I err on the side of caution now to give the antivenom because I've seen the sequelae or the problems afterwards when I didn't give it. I've had run into people, 10 years later and they go, man, I'll tell you what, about lost my leg. Wish we'd got, wish we'd given that antivenom. And they're okay now, but I've also been humbled to kind of go, okay, I've been more aggressive in my approach. This past summer, not this summer, but 2024, I gave antivenom 3 different times. About once a month for maybe I'll say April, May, June, and just kind of trying to be aware. If you get hit, take it as real and seek attention because when things start going bad, they can go bad quickly, and then you may not be able to seek attention.
Right.
And so
My thinking on that, I'm scared to death of a snake. If I get bit, I'm probably going to have a heart attack. But even if a snake is non-venomous, you're not worried about the toxin. You can get all kind of bacterial infections and things like that. So I go to the
great
doctor,
point.
get it checked out, and don't play around with that kind of stuff.
No, great point. Great point. In fact, that's part of the discussion around why you should not cut the wound because your blade was not clean when you cut it. You might have been cutting wood or an apple or skinning a deer with it if you're like me, right? And so you don't want to be cutting that and putting those things in there. But yeah, no, I think that's a good point that the risk of infection is higher than the venom when you start talking about the fact that now we can treat it with antivenom. So but the majority of snake bites are not venomous snake bites by definition. And so when you start talking about that, then you run into infection problems. So I totally agree with you right there. It's a good point.
Well, Dr. Bowden, we've talked a lot about some instances and some things we need to pay attention to. One thing we haven't talked about is what kind of first aid kit should somebody have if they're on a farm? Some general things that they need to keep with them just in case an accident happens.
Yeah, that was a good point. We kind of touched up on that in the front end when we started talking about fractures and bleeding and things like that. Just having a kit where you have a lot of sterile dressings that you're confident they're sterile, even if they've been in there for a couple of years, you're still confident that they're really clean dressings. Having those because you want to be able to stuff them down in the wound without doubt. You want to be able to pack as much as you can. And the other thing I found, as much as we can talk about band-aids and other things like that, the tourniquet is critical for stopping the situation from being this is bad to this is lethal.
Right.
And so I've seen a number of situations where first responders put that tourniquet on and they save that patient. One of the classic examples I remember a gentleman tried to take his own life and cut his wrists and cut his radial artery and took off running through the woods. He was kind of had some other things involved chemically that were not helping his thinking, I'm sure, but nonetheless, took off running through the woods far enough where he ran out to where he passed out. He lost enough blood where he passed out. So he was in a bad situation. By the time the cops actually catch him and get to him, he's lost enough blood to pass out. They don't put a tourniquet on him and get him into me, and I get him some blood and get him tanked back up and doing better. He dies from that radial artery wound if you don't treat it appropriately and can't just put pressure by the wound, or you got to pack it. You got to put pressure on the wound, in the wound. And if that's not doing it and you're still bleeding, you got to put a tourniquet on and knowing that you got to get somewhere quickly, or somebody's got to get to you quickly. So,
Well, Dr. Bowden, we really appreciate you taking time to visit with us today. We've covered a lot of great information. I hope this is going to help people out there kind of know what to do. Is there anything else that you feel we haven't talked about that you really think we need to mention before we sign off today?
yeah, Mike, I'm glad you gave me that opportunity. This will sound crazy, but you and I grew up with immunizations, right? And tetanus was part of that immunization with some few other things in there. I won't go in there and talk about the logic or the things of those now, but there are about 2 or 3 cases of tetanus that happen in Louisiana a year, and I'm sure a couple, 2 or 3 in Mississippi, or a couple in Arkansas a year. And I'd been out maybe 2 or 3 years and ran across an old timer, a farmer, came in to see me and couldn't get his dentures out, and it struck me as odd. And I was like, well, my little simple brain went straight to lockjaw, and I said, well, I said, my Mimi used to take her dentures out every night and put them in some effervescent something. I don't even know what it was called, right? I don't know if
Right,
you're old enough
right.
to remember that, right?
Yes.
Mama had that in the glass on the side table. So I said, did you cut yourself or do anything unusual lately? And he said, no, no, I ain't got no. I said, you have any wounds anywhere? He said, no, no. And he said, well, about 2 weeks ago, I was walking through the barn without my shoes on, and I stubbed my toe on a disc. And I said, huh. I said, let me see that toe. So he whipped his foot out, and the toe looked perfectly healed up, but had a purple look to it that didn't look like a right human color, and then didn't look like a bruise. It just had kind of an odd purple look. So I called up the gentleman and the hospitalist, and he laughed and said, he was like, yeah, that's you found a case of tetanus, right? And I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure. So I'd been into the hospital. The next day, he was intubated because he had respiratory failure from the tetanus. And 3 months later, he left the hospital alive, which was crazy. But he
Wow.
was in respiratory failure that long because it's typically a lethal disease. So if you said, that's a long story to tell me about tetanus, I'd go, I'm just trying to drive a point home to go, I think that's actually a good thing. I'm not here to sell immunizations across the board or anything like that. But the idea of going, I've seen it and I saw the outcome of it, and I can sell those now. I can sell you a tetanus shot if you come in and cut yourself. So, and it has to do with dirty wounds we think about, because tetanus is ubiquitous. It's everywhere and in the soil, not in the air, mind you, per se, but it's in the soil. And so any dirty wound or cut, something like that, you're at risk for it. So
And that reminds me, I'm probably due to get my tetanus shot. How long are they good now? It used to be 2 or 3 years back when I was a kid, but I think they're longer
yeah.
now, right?
Yeah, yeah. I kind of, it's almost become a universal. If you break the skin, you get a tetanus shot. So if you told me I'm washing knives in the kitchen, I ate steak with this knife last night, and I'm washing the kitchen next day. I said, you cut it. I go, it's really 10 years, right? You didn't have tetanus on that knife. You didn't have it in your sink per se, unless you're doing a lot of stuff in your sink you probably should not be doing with food around. So I would tell you if you said, no, I was in the garden and I found an old knife that I had there back there a couple of years ago, and I cut myself on that one. I'd go, that's a tetanus setup. So I'm a 5-year guy in that range. You come in, you cut it on the kitchen knife in the sink. If you're not up to date, I'm going to hook you up. But I think of it more of an extended period of time because of the risk involved. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Yes, sir.
Just certain.
Okay. Well, listeners, we really appreciate you tuning in. I hope you've learned something from this, something that may help you down the road. Dr. Bowden, thanks again for joining us. Listeners, if you will, stay tuned for just a few moments and we'll be right back with segment 2. Farming isn't farming without questions, and now there's a place to go for answers. At eKonomics, an entire team of agronomists is waiting and ready to help for free. No question is too big or too small. Visit Nutrien-economics.com and submit your question with the Ask an Agronomist feature. Listeners, welcome back for segment 2. Really enjoying doing this section every week where we talk to an agronomist and ask them a question of the week. To help us do that this week, we have Lyle Cowell, Senior Agronomist with Nutrien, back with us today. Lyle, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I appreciate this segment of your show. It's great to be able to answer some questions from the farmers in the field.
Lyle, we know you've been around for quite a long time and have a lot of experience up in the Canadian region dealing with different soil fertility related issues. And the question I wanted to ask you today is, during your time working up there, what has been the most unusual circumstance you've come across involving soil fertility?
That's a good question. And, the most unusual one, and this is a bit from the left field, and probably the soil fertility question that has confounded me the most, probably where I made the most mistakes in understanding it, is a very minor issue of manganese toxicity that we see in some of our soils. That is a problem that I misdiagnosed. Manganese toxicity looks exactly like sulfur deficiency in canola. In wheat, it looks a lot like potassium deficiency or even just drought in wheat. And I mistook it as a problem for other issues, sulfur deficiency, the first couple of times that I saw it in the field. Now, it's a minor problem, but it's a very important problem if you have the problem. And these soils have increased in acreage in the past few years. I see more and more pictures of it, get more questions about it. And where is it occurring? It's occurring in sandy, acidic soils in the northern prairies that have become more acidified over the course of crop production. So as they become more and more acidic, and these are quite acidic soils with pHs of 5 or less than 5. And in those conditions, manganese, which is an essential required nutrient, becomes soluble at toxic levels to the point that it reduces crop production. So that is most certainly the most perplexing soil nutrient issue that I've ever run up against in my career, Mike.
Lyle, that's an interesting situation. I can't say that I would have gotten that one right either. Lyle, we appreciate you taking your time to visit with us today. Always get a lot out of your answers here. Listeners, we appreciate you staying with us this week. If you have any questions about anything we've talked about today, you can always visit our website. That's nutrien-economics.com. Until next time, this has been Mike Howell with The Dirt. Hey guys, if you like what you heard today, do us a favor and share this podcast with someone else. It could be your neighbor, your friend, your crop advisor, or whoever you think would enjoy it. Your support helps ensure future episodes, so please like, subscribe, share, and rate the show wherever you're listening from.